A couple of sessions ago, Timuchin was up here talking about the perception of a nation. We're going to sort of continue along this line. Our next speaker is from the United Kingdom. He is a policy advisor. Simon Anholt is a popular speaker at this year's summit because he was just in the Red Hall over there, part of a panel, but here we will have his undivided attention, and he will be talking about the defining the nation's branding. Simon?
Well, thanks very much for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I have the luxury of having 20 or 25 minutes to talk to you. Oh, there's a timer which I was hoping for, but this one says 16 minutes. Should I ignore that? Okay. So this subject of the images of countries is a truly fascinating topic, and it's one I've given the last 25 years of my life to studying. It's a subject which is, in a sense, endlessly fascinating because it incorporates and it includes so many other disciplines. You can't really talk about the images of nations without understanding a little bit about culture, about international relations, about politics, about economics, about what makes the world work. And the question of image as well is a really, really interesting topic because you have to probe deep into human psychology to understand our human relationship with perceptions and reality. Are they the same thing? Well, of course, at a very basic level, perceptions are incredibly important to us as human beings. In fact, they're everything because, of course, we can only experience the world through our perceptions of it. And I guess the reason why this topic is so important to governments today is because it encourages them to think about their country's place and position in the world. Why are we here? What are we doing? What's the purpose of a country anyway in the 21st century? But I'm not going to dive straight into the huge philosophical questions. We'll maybe save those for later. What I promised I would do is to give a little introduction to the whole idea of this concept of nation as brand and to tell the story of where that idea comes from. Back in the 1990s, I wrote a paper in an academic journal which I called Nation Brands of the 21st Century. And it was a relatively short essay, not really an academic paper at all, which had discussed the idea that in the age of advanced globalization, when the product that you buy could come from almost literally anywhere on the planet, and the people you meet, the people you hire, the people you work or study with, the job you apply for, the economy you invest in, all of those things could come from almost literally any country on the planet. Suddenly it becomes very important for people to know how to choose. If I'm faced with the choice of buying an automobile, and the only real difference between them is that one comes from Italy and one comes from Germany and one comes from China, which one do I choose? What do I feel about Italy and Germany and China that would push my decision in one direction or the other? Do I trust the Germans more than the Italians? Do I think the Italians are more stylish than the Chinese? Do I think the Chinese product is going to be more advanced, maybe more cost-effective than the German one? And so in this age of advanced globalization, the images of countries become, paradoxically, almost more important than the reality, for the simple reason that we just don't know the reality of 205 countries. Most of us know very little about other countries. All we know is what we feel, what we believe, our perceptions, our prejudices, our ignorance, let's be honest, because most of those countries, we've never visited them. We don't really know very much about them. And so those simple stereotypes become incredibly important because they drive and they motivate the behaviors of millions and millions of people all around the world. And they influence the flow of trillions of dollars. So this is why, right at the beginning, I claimed that it's part of the job of governments today, in the 21st century, when I wrote it, it was the 20th century, to understand, to measure what is the image of their country, and to ask themselves, is it true or is it false, this image? Do we deserve it, or is it somehow unfair, biased, distorted, out of date, not so useful to the aims and aspirations that we have as a country? Now, I'm just going to talk about vocabulary very briefly, because I think the vocabulary is very important. At this wonderful summit, I've seen the word branding being used a lot. And I'm very suspicious of that word branding. In fact, I'm very suspicious of the word brand, the root, and all of the manifestations of that word, for the simple reason that it's a term that doesn't have a commonly agreed meaning. If you talk to 20 people and ask them how they would define brands or branding, you'll probably get 20 different answers. And it seems to me, listening to people talking about nation branding or city branding or regional branding, a lot of the time what they're actually talking about is the promotion of the specific sectors of those countries or regions or cities. In other words, they're talking about promoting tourism, selling vacations, or else they're talking about encouraging foreign investment in their economy, investment promotion. And so the first principle that I think I would really like to share with you is the importance of being really vigilant and not getting confused or muddled between the sector-specific promotional activities that countries do, promoting tourism, promoting investment, promoting culture, promoting exports, and the management of the overall image of the country, because those are very different things. At heart, if you're selling a vacation to somebody, it's a very simple message. You're saying, come on holiday to my country, you're going to love it. In other words, you're offering them a product and you're saying, buy this, it's good. Okay? And using marketing to do that is not only legitimate, not only potentially very effective, it's also necessary, because all your competitors are doing the same thing. And you need to either outspend them or you need to do it better than they do. And that's the contest of the marketplace for tourism. It's the contest of the marketplace for investment promotion, for exports, for Turkish airlines, for everything that you're selling to the world. But if, on the other hand, what you're trying to do is you're trying to improve or enhance or upgrade the image of Turkey as a country, that's a totally different kind of message. You're not saying, buy this, it's good, because Turkey is not for sale, I believe. Everybody out there, by definition, has got a perfectly good country of their own, and they're not in the market for a new one. So the message that you're selling to people is not, buy this, it's good. The message you're selling is, you will change your mind about this country. And most people instinctively recognize that message for what it is, which is government propaganda from a foreign government. And we ignore it. All of the evidence shows that attempts at propagandistic communications of that sort, look how wonderful my country is, are invariably and routinely ignored. Now, I've been measuring the images of countries now for 20 years. Back in 2005, in fact sometime before, I started running an annual survey called the Nation Brands Index. And it's a very large opinion poll. We have a large questionnaire of more than 40 different questions, probing people's perceptions, their knowledge, their ignorance, their cliches, their stereotypes, their judgments, their views, their opinions, about 60 countries. And we probe those very, very deeply. We send out that questionnaire to 60,000 people around the world. That's a sample equivalent to about 70% of the world's population, and more than 80% of its spending power. So it's a big study. It produces an enormous amount of data, and it tells us a number of really interesting things. The first thing it tells us, and it started telling me this way back in 2005, is that country images don't normally change. They are, in fact, incredibly stable phenomena. I often joke that the Nation Brands Index is the most boring social survey ever created, because from year to year, it simply hardly ever changes. Once people have formed their perceptions or their prejudices about other countries, they really don't want to let go of them. And almost nothing can induce people to change their minds about other countries. Because those images of other countries, they're not something that you invent yourself. They come from the culture around you. Growing up in the United Kingdom, I grew up with a sense of who the French were because they're our nearest neighbors. And it occurs to me, thinking about it, that British views of France are part of the British culture. French views of Britain are part of the French culture. These things that we call national images are enormous, complex, slow-moving cultural phenomena. And to imagine that we can change or distort them just by buying some media space and sending out a few facile advertising messages is a delusion of the most extravagant kind. There is no evidence that it works. Over the years that I've been running the Nation Brands Index, I have tested repeatedly to see if there's some correlation between the amount of money that governments spend on nation branding and the quality of their image, and there is zero correlation. It doesn't work. Sector-specific promotion does work. Turkey is enormously good at it. Turkey has spent a lot of money doing very good promotion for Turkish tourism. Turkish Airlines is very good at promoting itself. It's done an incredible job. But these are straightforward marketing exercises when you're selling a product or a service. But to change the overall image of the country, that's a different matter. And yet, governments want to know how to do that. Why? Because it's so very important. One of the things that I started writing about back in the late 1990s was how important national images are. And basically my argument was that if a country is lucky enough to have a powerful and positive image, then everything is easy and everything is cheap for that country. If you're Sweden and you're lucky enough to have this wonderful positive image, I mean, everybody loves Sweden, right? Apart from Norway, but everybody loves Sweden. And so for Sweden, it's so easy. If they want to attract foreign investment, if they want to attract tourists, if they want to attract talent, if they want to export their products and services and their culture, and they want good, productive diplomatic relations with other governments, it's so easy because they're Sweden. And they have such a good image that everybody wants to do business with them. They even manage to have a highly successful tourism industry. It's freezing in Sweden. And yet people still want to go there because the image is so good. If, on the other hand, you're unlucky enough to have a negative image, people associate you with negative stuff that they don't like, or you have a weak image, they know nothing about you, they don't even know where you are or how to spell your name, then everything is difficult and everything is expensive. If Albania wants to promote tourism on its Riviera, it's so much harder and so much more expensive to promote the Albanian Riviera than it is to promote the French Riviera. Why? Because everybody thinks they love France, and not everybody thinks they love Albania. I offer no comment as to whether that's true or fair or up to date, but that's what people think, and that's what we've got to deal with. Something I've often said many times over the years is that there's really only one superpower left on the planet, and that's international public opinion. And all of us, in our various different ways, are trying to do diplomacy with that superpower. We have to take it seriously. Even if what it believes is based on ignorance, we still have to take it seriously because it's so important. There's been study after study after study over the last 20 years proving how fundamentally important national image is to everything that a country wants to do. National image is, in fact, in my opinion, very largely responsible for the increasing wealth gap between the richest and the poorest countries on the planet today. Why? Because poor countries, they not only have to cope with weak infrastructure, weak economies, and weak everything, but they also have to do battle every day against the headwind of a negative reputation, which ensures that everything they do, even the good things, make people suspicious, make people doubt it. A negative or a weak image is a structural deficit, as the economists would say. It makes everything more difficult and everything more expensive. So at this point, my friends, we have a really interesting dilemma. On the one hand, we know that having a good national image is fundamentally important. It drives everything you do, and it can obstruct everything you do in the modern globalized world. But on the other hand, we just don't know how to make it more positive. We just don't know what really works. We can kid ourselves that having a lovely new logo and a fantastic slogan and pretending that the country is a product that we can market like a product, but there's no evidence from the research, as I said, that actually works. It really doesn't work. I've spent the last 25 years looking for one single shred of evidence that messaging can change the image of a country, and I'm still looking. I haven't found one. If any of you here today can show me a case study with numbers that proves that any country, or indeed even any city or region, has actually demonstrably moved the needle on its international image purely through marketing and communications, then I will kiss you. Because I would love to be able to change my view on this point, but up until now, I have no evidence to do so. So, of course, the big question is, if it's not messaging, and it's not public relations, and it's not slogans and logos, because countries really aren't products, then what is it? Are we stuck with the national image that we've got, or is there a way to change it? This was such an important question, such a fundamental question, that in 2012 I decided I was going to take some time off and try to answer it. Luckily, by this point, I had a lot of data that I could examine, because the Nation Brands Index, the survey I mentioned before, had by this stage accumulated over 1 billion data points. Now, 1 billion data points is good data. That means that there are some answers to some questions in there if you can only find them. Sadly, I am a very poor statistician, so it took me a very, very long time to try to get the truth out of this database. But the truth for me was a simple single question. Why do people around the world admire some countries more than others? What is it about those countries that creates the admiration? If we had 2.5 hours, I would go through the detail of how I produced an answer to that question, but because we haven't got very long, I'll just give you the answer. The answer is that there are about 5 reasons why people admire certain countries more than others. And 4 of those reasons are the kinds of reasons you'd probably expect. So, for example, is it beautiful? Right? Does it look nice? Now, those of us who are lucky enough to be sighted, we do have a tendency to judge the world on the basis of what it looks like. So if we think that a country is beautiful, we're likely to think a lot of other good things about it as well, because that's the fallacy of human nature. We always trust good-looking people, even though we probably shouldn't, just because we think if they're that good-looking, they must be trustworthy. That's the way human beings work. An English poet by the name of John Keats once observed, "Truth is beauty, beauty, truth. That is all you know on earth, and all you need to know." He went a bit far, but he was a poet. So, the physical aspect of the country is important, and countries that do a lot of good tourism promotion, like Turkey or like New Zealand or like Australia, they do benefit in the long term because people know they look good, and that helps. There are other factors, like what Professor Joseph Nye of Harvard calls hard power. If a country has the potential to impose its will on the international community because it's perceived to have a big economy or a big army or a big population or a big territory, of course, that makes it look bigger in their worldview. And of course, that gives it a more powerful image. Not necessarily a more positive one, but a more powerful one. Technology plays a role. Today, a lot of people, particularly younger people, tend to admire countries that they perceive to be technologically advanced. We like smart, modern, up-to-date countries, but it's not a very big factor. There's the question of relevance. It may be that I admire a country deep in Latin America very much, but in the end, it doesn't have much power to affect me and the world that I live in. So probably that's not going to give it a really, really powerful and positive image. But the 5th factor, I said there were 5 factors that drive a positive national image. The 5th one was the surprising one. And by a really significant margin, it was the most powerful one. And that was the perception that the country is a good country. Now, what the hell do we mean by that? What is a good country anyway? Well, what the research seemed to be telling was that people most admired the countries about which they feel glad that that country exists, right? I admire Norway because I'm glad that Norway exists. Why am I glad that Norway exists? I've never been there, I'm never going to go there, I don't know anything about it. Oh wait, I do know one thing about it. I remember something called the Oslo Peace Accords. And Oslo's in Norway, right? And the peace accords was something to do with Israel-Palestine, right? Which is a conflict, and I don't like conflict. So I like Norway because Norway is fighting against conflict. It's trying to make peace in the world. And if I'm a normal human being, conflict is the one thing I cannot tolerate. So I like Norway. And I'm much more likely, therefore, to buy a Norwegian product, to go on holiday to Norway, another cold country where I probably shouldn't go on holiday, but because I like and admire them, I will. I'm much more likely to hire a Norwegian person. I'm much more likely to go and live and study and work in Norway if I can, because I think Norway is good. Because I think it's a country driven by values that reflect my values to some degree. It may be culturally very different, but they do seem to believe in humanity. They do seem to be worried, as I am worried, by the global challenges facing humanity today. So what's a good country? A good country is a country that is motivated by values that I share. A country that seems to be working hard to tackle climate change, poverty, inequality, armed conflict, abuses of human rights, abuses of women's rights, abuses of children's rights, small arms proliferation, water rights, pollution. I mean, I could go on all day. We are living in the age of gigantic global challenges. Whenever we turn on the news, wherever we turn, we see nothing but existential challenges facing humanity. The United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals is a pretty good short list of the ones that we should lie awake at night worrying about. In fact, sometimes I find I wake up in the middle of the night screaming about them. We're all worried about the state of the planet at the moment because we're facing so many of these huge challenges. And so that's really what we're obsessed by. I don't care whether another country has got beautiful mountains nearly as much as I care about whether it's doing something about climate change or protecting those mountains. I don't care very much at all about whether a country looks after its own population, because that doesn't affect me. I don't live in that country. But I do care about whether it's trying to stop the pandemic, because the pandemic is going to affect me. Do you see what it is? Most governments, when they're trying to do, quote, nation branding, they think that it's about telling the world how wonderful you are, bragging about your successes and your achievements, but by definition, nobody else cares about your successes and achievements because they don't benefit from them. They don't benefit from them. It's of no interest. What they do care about is, am I glad that that country exists? Is it a principled player in the international community? Would I miss it if it vanished? Do I think that it's working hard and honestly towards making a world that I and my children and my grandchildren will be happy to live in peacefully and stably in the future? That is all that matters. So in the end, the answer is an incredibly simple one. If you want a better image, if you want to change your image, you have to change direction. You have to make a serious national commitment towards doing good in the world, benefiting not only your own people, but every man, woman, child, and animal on the planet, whether you like it or not, because that's the only place that admiration and reputation can come from. And admiration and reputation are the only drivers of prosperity. So nobody has any choice in the matter. It's the only way to go. Now, I'm done, but I want to leave you with one last important point about that. Please don't think that what I'm saying here is that nations need to sacrifice their own interests. I'm not saying that nations have to start giving away more money to poor nations if they've got enough money to do so. Sure, that's useful. Sure, it's valuable, but that's not really what I'm talking about. This is not an act of self-sacrifice. I'm not saying you need to care about climate change or be good just because that's the right thing to do and you'll go to heaven after you die. No, I'm saying you should do that because it's in your direct, immediate, short-term economic interest. Example after example after example shows that countries that become mission-driven, that care about the whole planet, that manage to harmonize their domestic and their international responsibilities to do the right thing for their own people and to do the right thing for other countries' people, those are the ones who acquire image overnight. And they don't suffer for it, they benefit from it. It is the right thing to do, and it's the good thing to do. Just as they used to say in the corporate environment, doing well and doing good are the same thing. And the parallel to corporate social responsibility is an interesting one, because basically what I'm talking about here is corporate social responsibility, but for countries, not just for companies. It works, it can be proved to work, and it is literally the only choice that we have. So I would urge all of us, when we're thinking about nation branding, to think a little bit less for once about opportunities and a little bit more for once about responsibilities. Well done, Turkey. Well done, Turkey, for doing so much on migrants, for looking after so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of migrants from Syria. You put the rich world to shame in doing that, and eventually, trust me, that will convert into reputation. It may take a while, but it works, and you're set off on what looks to me like a really, really good course. Stick with it. Thank you.